Hello everyone and welcome back to Always Watching. Today we're discussing the new American Murder Saga. This three-part docuseries premiering on Netflix August 14th. This three-part docuseries unpacks the Laci Peterson case. I felt like it was a great documentary, especially for people unfamiliar with the case. Like, it literally takes you through step by step and explains everything. For people who are already familiar with this case and who have seen every documentary, the only difference between this Netflix series and a YouTube breakdown are the interviews. The documentary talks to Laci's friends, the woman he had an affair with, the prosecution, the defense, even jury members, police officers, basically anyone who has ever come in contact with this case at this time. And listening to them recollect their memories of this time, I thought was really important because it shed light on how any woman can fall victim to a man like Scott, or fall victim to a situation like this. Scott has maintained his innocence, and from what I've read, the Innocence Project has actually taken on his case. The documentary also interviews Scott's family, and they are adamant that he is innocent, and I did like that they included their perspective because it does feel balanced. Like, the documentary doesn't try to really force anything on you. It's up to you to decide if there are loose ends that need tying up. The documentary acknowledges that a lot of the evidence against Scott was circumstantial, but they stress over 3 episodes that he was the reason that he went to jail. His very odd behavior from the very beginning was impossible to ignore. As hard as they tried to rule him out, he just refused to let them. Now, the first episode unpacks the case, like it starts to unpack the case, and it also introduces us to Laci and her relationship with Scott. And I did like the back and forth. It never felt frantic or unorganized. Like, this documentary is very smooth. One point that really struck out at me is when Laci's friends were describing their courtship and how they basically saw Scott through her eyes, and for that reason they overlooked a lot of red flags. Now, looking back on the case, they realized that maybe this relationship progressed too soon. Maybe he was love bombing her. Like, there were a lot of things that became clear only now, that at the time, just like, they were almost as caught up in the fantasy of him as she was. I do think these reflections are important because now we are definitely more aware of red flags and different signs, but during this time, this was not really a conversation being had, or if it was, it wasn't as mainstream as it is now. Now, when Laci went missing, immediately it started to get a lot of attention, especially because she was pregnant. And from the beginning, the police really honed in on Scott. His alibi was super shady. Like, it was probably the worst alibi in history, and his demeanor really did not help. He avoided the press, and his logic at first did seem sound. He's in shock. Maybe he doesn't want to jump to conclusions and assume the worst. He wants to keep the attention on Laci. Like, all of it seemed rational at the time. But the biggest issue is this is not a murder case yet. It's a missing persons case, and there's a sense of urgency. So the police were kind of desperate to try and find as many clues as possible, find her as fast as possible. But Scott was just putting up all these barriers. He would not take a polygraph. He didn't really want to let them search the house. Like, he was just like, they were basically like, listen, we need to find your wife. And he was just like, but I need a lawyer. Like, he was already acting like someone accused of murder. And I think one of my favorite lines in the documentary is when they said there was very little innocence in his behavior. Like, he was just defensive from the very beginning. And no one had known what happened yet. Like, they were really hoping that they would find her. Maybe she had an accident. Murder was very far from their minds. His behavior could have been excused had it not been for the fact that he was having a full-blown affair with a woman named Amber Fry. The documentary transitions very smoothly because episode 2 talks more about the media, how it was building up, and also interviews Amber. I thought this interview with Amber was probably one of the most compelling in this entire documentary. She recounts her affair with Scott, and she also listens to all their conversations again, because during this time they were recording him, they were trying to trap him, and so watching her listen to these recordings, you could tell was just bringing back a lot of old memories. And once the media got a hold of this, they went absolutely berserk. they painted her as a mistress, as this secret lover, and they created a whole story that just simply wasn't the case. And because this was getting more and more attention, the media was basically looking for anything to blow up into something salacious and to sell papers. And it was working. Even before this case went to trial, it was already a hit. Now, what struck me as so odd about Amber and Scott's relationship is even before he met her, he was actively looking for a partner. He was looking for someone to date. Like, he was not behaving in a way that suggested that he was married or had kids. Like, these are not coworkers, some woman that he was friends with or colleagues with. He was actively looking for someone new. And because of his work schedule, she fit into his life perfectly. And he just lied. He lied about everything. He basically integrated himself into her life, and they were in plain sight. As far as she was concerned, he was her boyfriend. And one detective said it the best, like he was a masterful romantic. He had this way of he lied, and like his lies were just told in such a way that it was just kind of hard to believe. Like, he did it with such a straight face. Now, the affair would not have been enough to send him to prison. Like, just because someone does something horrible doesn't mean they killed someone, but it was the way he reacted every time he was caught or confronted with some damning new evidence. For example, when Amber confronted him about being married, he managed to spin the entire situation and make himself the victim. And it's one thing to say that your wife is dead. It's another thing to say your wife died on the same day he was buying a boat to likely dispose of her body. Like, his lies were really sinister, and they were just told with such a straight face, and he never really owned up to anything. Looking at Scott, he definitely did seem like the type of person that could have played to the media. Like, he definitely could have played the grieving husband and done the whole theatrics, and honestly, it might have helped him a lot. But I think he really believed that worst case scenario, they would never find the body. And even if they did, there's not enough evidence to actually put him behind bars. Like, there was such a sense of arrogance in his behavior. Like, he has everything figured out. He's already kind of calculated the worst case scenario. So he was moving in a way that was really like, come at me if you can, but you got nothing. And his behavior is so alarming. Again, the documentary does a good job of showing how the more the police kind of hone in on him, the more erratic his behavior became. He started selling her car. He wanted to sell the house. The nursery became the storage. Like, he was already done with this life. Like, he was like, I'm gonna pack it up and start a new life. And he seemed totally unfazed. Now, the documentary is very careful to look into other theories or other suspects. Now, whether or not the police did their due diligence and actually properly investigated the other theories, I leave that up to you. Like, the whole thing about a burglary, the fact that a number of people saw a pregnant woman walking that morning, but they couldn't really identify Laci. Like, there does seem to be other possible scenarios. Now, whether or not these scenarios were properly looked into, again, it's really unclear. And Scott's behavior was not helping. And I do think the police definitely had tunnel vision, because every time they tried to eliminate him, he just refused to be eliminated. Now, the final episode unpacks the media frenzy and how the media may have played a part in Scott's conviction. Now, once the police found the body and this turned into a murder investigation, Scott just basically lost his mind. Again, his behavior just kept getting worse and worse. The fact that he changed his appearance, he stocked up on credit cards and fake IDs. Like, this is what you do when you're preparing to be on the run. And it's hard to know what was going through this man's head, because I think one legal expert in the documentary says how he lied, but his lies were very short term. Like, he didn't really think about the longevity of these lies. Like, they were enough to keep him safe for a period of time, but because they were just so bad and because they were just so unbelievable or just easily disproven, he kept having to do more and more extreme things to try and take attention off himself. Once the case started, it basically just became like for TV. Like, the media went nuts. They were expecting a conviction. They were expecting juicy stories. And it doesn't help that their primary witness was Amber. And Amber was basically going through her own trial. She walked into that courtroom with the task of trying to disprove what has already been said about her. And what ultimately helped her are these tapes, these recordings between herself and Scott. And these tapes really stressed what the police had difficulty articulating. Again, this case is entirely circumstantial. They don't know when the murder happened. They don't know how it happened. They assume suffocation or strangulation, but they don't actually have any forensic evidence tying him to the case. Now, what these tapes did is they painted a mental picture, and this mental picture was one of a man that could care less that his wife went missing. And again, like when you're talking about someone's behavior, it's really hard to articulate, okay, maybe he was acting weird. That doesn't mean he killed someone. But when the documentary kind of puts it together in such a way, along with these tapes, that like by the end, you're like, I don't know what he did, but he definitely did something. And one juror was explaining how it wasn't even, again, his actions, like having an affair, being a bad person, that's still not enough to convict you. But it's the way he went about it. It's the way he kept lying. It's the way he was moving that was just so weird and just devoid of any logic or emotion. Like he was really moving in a way, like he was moving in such arrogance. He really believed that worst case scenario, like he would never be held accountable for this. And that was his whole demeanor, even in the interviews. Like there was just this kind of like it is what it is. And at first you can't dismiss it as maybe he's just traumatized, but then you kind of realize, oh, maybe it's because he just doesn't care. And that's where the documentary ends, with his conviction. Now, this is a case that has had like God knows how many documentaries, how many YouTube breakdowns. It's one that we repeatedly keep coming back to. And I think it's fascinating, not just because of the heinous nature of the crime, but the media and the press and how they were able to actually create stories and dramas that really did affect how legal system. This has obviously gotten much worse since then. Like this case destroyed two different families. Scott's family really believes that he's innocent, and Laci's family really believes that he's guilty, and they will be fighting until the end of time to prove their side correct. Like this is far from over. Scott's family is still working very hard to get him out. So you guys let me know what you think, and until next time.